Great. Thank you, Megan.
Of course.
So welcome to Second Saturday Conversation. And what we've been exploring this year is going home to another way, not just by another way, which is what the Gospel of Matthew talks about, going home by another way, but going home to another way. And what we've been exploring is Christianity in and for the 21st century. Christianity for the 21st century. I hope there is one. I think that there will be. My part of our concern in our conversations this year has been that propositions and confessional creeds and doctrine and dogma, that they don't fully capture, as though they could, but they don't fully express what really is the heart of Christianity, what really is the spirit and wisdom of Christianity. And this is not an indictment of church, by the way, because without church, we wouldn't have a memory of Jesus and his dream, which is also our dream of what can be possible, that there is another way of going about how we live on this earth and how we live with one another. So what I am interested in is, how do we articulate or re-articulate the heart of Christianity in our time? And that was Marcus's work. Marcus was, he was part of a conversation of how do we talk about Christianity now in the 21st century? And I'm part of that conversation. We've been part of that conversation together. And we will continue that conversation next year, by the way. Today is the last session of our gatherings this year. We'll begin again in September 11th. But just welcome to these conversations and to an exploration of the heart of Christianity. Megan, do you want to give us a little talk about how we deal with our mute buttons and everything else?
Yes, almost committed the cardinal Zoom without unmuting myself. So, so I have a script, everyone. Good morning. I have the slightly unsavory portion of the morning, although important, I know. Just as a reminder to please keep yourselves muted throughout the morning unless you're called upon. If you do have questions or comments during the conversation, please direct them to the chat, which you should be able to find the button for the chat. You might have to click 3 dots that says more as well. We want to use the chat space as a place for your comments related to the topic for the day. We will draw from the chat space for our plenary session, which will be moderated by Jeff Cresswell this morning. And if you want to be called upon, you can also indicate so in the chat. Before the plenary, we will give you a few minutes to write any questions or comments you might have. As I said before, Jeff Cresswell will moderate our plenary session, and then this will be a time to reflect on the thoughts and ideas shared by Marianne this morning. If you would like to personally connect with Marianne, we're offering a coffee time from 11 to 11:15 after the presentation and the plenary. Again, if you have any questions during the conversation, please direct them to the chat. Please keep yourselves muted unless we call upon you. And Jeff and I will be moderating the chat this morning. During the plenary, Jeff will call on you to ask your question or share your thoughts, at which time you can unmute yourself. Thank you so much for your time and your space this morning, and let's enjoy.
Great. Thanks, Megan, so much. I appreciate your presence with us and your guidance in how to do all this. As I've said to you before, I couldn't do this without your help. So thank you for that. I want to begin this morning with a couple of readings. One, a quote that I've used every time we've been gathering, and it's from Van Morrison. It's from the song that we heard that led us into this time, When Heart is Open. Marcus and I courted to Van Morrison. So Van Morrison and his music has a dear place in my heart. And this is a song of his that I'm particularly fond of. So from Van Morrison, when heart is open, you will change. Just like a flower slowly opening. When heart is open, you will change. Just like a flower slowly opening. And from 1 Corinthians. When I was a child, I spoke like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. When I became an adult, I put an end to childish ways. Second reading, and this is a shortened version of the slide, the quote that was put up on the screen as we were coming into this session from Marcus, but this is a shortened version of that. The task of Christian theology is to interpret a given, a received tradition in a present cultural context. It's always been so. The given cannot simply be conformed to the present. It must be allowed its own voice, must from time to time be reformulated to speak to a changed cultural context. Discerning the heart of Christianity thus involves us in an unending conversation, a metaphor of Kenneth Burke, an American intellectual whose life spanned most of the 20th century. Being Christian, though, involves not just talk, but the transformation of our lives. Discerning the heart of Christianity involves us in an unending conversation and the ongoing construction of what it means to be Christian and living from that understanding. And a third quote, and this is from T.S. Eliot. These, and I'm putting in the word conversations here, these conversations are only hints and guesses. Hints followed by guesses. And the rest is prayer, observance, discipline, thought, and action. The hint, half guessed, the gift, half understood, is incarnation. I want to say a little bit about why I chose these readings this morning. When I was a child, I thought like a child, and now I'm having to rethink, reimagine. And I want to share something from my own experience. When I was a little girl, I had a very deep sense that Jesus, I had a very strong feeling of his presence. I was not brought up in the church, and I was brought up in a country where Christianity was not the dominant religion. So this is a little bit of a mystery to me. I don't know how this came to be, but I had a very strong sense of Jesus from the time I was a little girl, and I considered him my guardian angel. So he was my guardian angel. And that's how I imagined him. That's how I experienced him. When I was in my mid-20s, I had what I've called a really powerful conversion experience. And I also felt a presence and felt addressed deeply. And I will say this about that it was the same Jesus, only entirely different. Only entirely different. And then much later in my life, but fairly recently though, I would say 15 years ago, maybe a little less than that, I came to realize that Jesus had functioned for me throughout my life, and certainly from childhood, as an attachment figure. I needed one. And in a sense, Jesus saved my life. He was my attachment figure. And because I wasn't brought up in the church, I didn't have any sense of judgment or that he had died for my sins. I mean, I learned that much later, and I didn't quite get it. I didn't buy it. I didn't understand it. I still don't. So the notion that, that Jesus had to die for our sins, my sins, in order for me to have a relationship with God, that was totally foreign to me. So Jesus was a accepting presence, a non-judgmental presence, saw me. And I didn't have to, in a sense, perform or do anything. Jesus accepted me. He knew I was there, and I knew he was there, okay? An attachment figure that has really helped me in my life. Now, I say all of that because some may think that my now talking about Jesus as an attachment figure is some kind of reduction to a psychological thing. Well, I don't see it that way. My own experience is something that's unfolding. What is this that I've experienced? What is this that I wonder about and in relationship to Jesus? What's going on here? Okay, I'm still exploring that. I'm still wondering. I'm still reflecting about that. In a sense, it's my unending conversation with my own experience. So when I was a child, I thought like a child, but now, I'm seeing things differently. I think that's a good thing. It's a positive thing. And what I want to encourage all of us is not to dismiss how we understood in earlier days, but know that we are moving through something and we're being called to understand it maybe more deeply, more broadly. Okay. So don't throw out what you experienced, but know that we're learning to talk about it and express it in a different way now that we're adults. The second quote from Marcus about allowing tradition, actually, it's a necessity, I think, having the tradition have its own voice anew in a different, changing cultural context. Okay. Tradition is not a static thing. It's not a fixed thing. Tradition is a living thing. If what we gain from tradition gets fixed and ossified, it no longer has real life in it. And what I don't want to see happen is for Christianity to become a museum piece. That we're talking about things that, we wonder if they happened or not a long time ago, or artifacts from stories from long ago, but that they're restricted to that time and that they don't really speak to us anymore, okay? As clergy myself, I don't feel I was called to be a docent. I think I've been called to listen to the movement of the Spirit, if you will, and how I understand the tradition as it lives and evolves in changing times and amidst different cultural contexts. So I think that Marcus's, and as I said, this is Marcus's work, that we are part of an unending conversation about Christianity. Okay, hopefully unending conversation about Christianity. And each era, we have the responsibility of sort of constructing a new way of understanding. I do not think that's a betrayal of the tradition. I think that's faithfulness to the tradition, to mine it and see how it continues to speak to us. So in that, I think the Christian tradition, if it will continue to live, is by nature open-ended. Okay. And I think that, in a sense, the Spirit, if you will, is way ahead of us. And the church is called to listen to the Spirit. I think we have a little catching up to do. And then finally, T.S. Eliot's, the quote from Dry Salvages. I love what he says about, all of this is hints and guesses. We really don't know fully what we're talking about. I loved it when Jack Caputo said, we really don't know. We're all blind, and we don't know who we are. And I think I said last time that when I came across this in Jack's writing, I was so relieved. It's like, whew, okay, we really don't know. And that was a relief. It puts me in a very different process than thinking, oh my God, I've got to figure it out, and do I have it right? Okay. So I love Eliot saying, it's all hints and guesses, hints followed by guesses. And yet we need to discern what we're sensing, what is our experience. I think Eliot's comment underscores the fact that everything is an interpretation. Now, some people may feel uncomfortable with that because it sounds like it's according to relativism, but I don't think that's the case. Everything needs to be interpreted. We interpret everything, let me put it that way. And we're storytellers, and we create stories. That's part of who we are as human beings. And so how we tell the story and why is really important. And if we don't sort this out for ourselves based on our own experience and our own understanding, somebody else will tell us how to interpret the story. So hints and guesses, and the importance of discernment. I mean, some stories are better than others. Some stories are more life-giving than others. Some stories are more controlling than others. So how we interpret is really important. And I would say that we interpret our tradition and our scripture stories. There's an art to it. And I just really appreciate how Eliot puts it, hints and guesses. It's all hints and guesses. And then this, and the hint half guessed, the gift half understood is incarnation. And I don't know exactly what he means by that, but what I sense is that our humanity, who we are, the fact that our interpretations are carnal. I mean, it comes out of our carnality and out of our awareness of our mortality. And that we are part of what these hints and guesses will end up proving to be true. We are the ones that will make our hints, the hints and guesses and our hopes and loves, we're the ones that will end up being the existence of those things and making those things true. So we're part of the gift in this. So I don't know what you make of that, but I wanted to share those, aside from Van Morrison, that when heart is open, we will change, like a flower slowly opening. And to borrow from another quote that I've used many times this year, and live and love without a why. That doesn't mean we're indifferent, but it means that we love freely. We blossom because we blossom. We live because we live. Okay. But the quote from Corinthians and Marcus's quote and the Eliot quote, I think, in many ways speak to what we have been about this year. And I'm curious to know what you think about that as well. So let me highlight a couple of things that we've been talking about this year. And then I will be eager to hear what has struck you, what has caught you, what puzzled you, how our conversations are contributing to conversations you're also having elsewhere. Let me say at the outset that I have drawn deeply from Marcus's work for the last 40 years, okay? So Marcus's work is foundational for my understanding Christianity in a deeper and truer light. So I'm highly indebted to Marcus's work, which continues to illuminate our understanding of Christianity and the Bible and making sense of all this. The other person, much more recently, who has very much influenced me has been Jack Caputo. Now, I think they are both moving toward the same thing. I think they both have the same hunches. I think they're both working off similar hints and guesses. They've been trained very differently. Marcus is a biblical scholar, a New Testament scholar. Jack is a philosopher and a theologian. Marcus is a theologian also. They use slightly different language and constructs to get to things. And I have found in my adult life now that the combination of those two has really helped me to think, to imagine, to wonder, and to start to re-articulate an understanding of Christianity. So let it be said that Jack and Marcus have been, their fingerprints are all over this year and our work, and they will continue to be influences as we continue the conversation next year. So let me say something about where we started. I began by talking a bit about religion, and I have a very positive sense and understanding of religion. I know that spirituality has taken its place. I don't think it started with Monica Lewinsky, but you remember when she had an interview with Barbara Walters and she said, "Oh, no, I'm not religious, I'm spiritual." So I said, I don't think it started there, but spirituality has really become the more attractive category to explore. Religion, though, I suggest is this, that religion is a response to something that deeply stirs us. It is something that we sense that actually makes a kind of claim to us. I think that the impulse for religion, that the capacity to respond to sort of the mystery and awe and wonder of existence, I think that capacity is deep in human structure. Okay. I think it's built into us, that we instinctively have a sense of summons or call, and that the religious impulse is our response to that. That's really what religion is. That's what it initially describes. And that deep in the structure of things, including our own, is a kind of goodness. Now, I'm not saying that things always turn out the way we want, okay? And it's not a moral category for me, but that there is a deep goodness in life and in existence that I think it's worth cherishing. And I think that our response to this mystery of existence is something that we can't not do. Okay. I want to say one more thing about that. I also think that we have an innate, and I'll be curious to know what you think, but that we have an innate fidelity to the world. That there is something in our very structure and being that is attuned to the world, to the earth, to the land and all of the life that's here, and to one another. Okay. And so I think we have built-in attunement and sense of fidelity to the earth. The other thing, and I think that's all about the religious impulse. And one more thing about the religious impulse, I think that we have a desire for a future that we can't see coming. But I think this is a deep and natural built-in part of what it means to be human. And I think our longing for a future has a lot to do with faith and hope and love. we long for these things, even though, and we have a sense that there's more to come, even though we don't know what's coming. But that somehow there is something that lures us, that calls us. And some of us are maybe more inclined to think about it than others, but I think this is a deep human instinct, and that's what I call religion. That is the religious impulse. And I would suggest that all of us who have been part of this Second Saturday conversation and who tune in, as I said, I'd love to hear your responses, but I think you know what I'm talking about. That there's something that has claimed us, that has called us, that summons us, and that we respond to that. And then how we make sense of it, that's then where religions come in. That religions become, they are made out of our constructions of how we try to make sense of this wonder. Okay. Our response is deep and instinctive. How we construct meaning around it can be incredibly helpful, illuminating, but there's the rub. Because I think sometimes the constructions of religion get in the way of our being open to continuing experience, which is why I think Jack Caputo is seeking a religionless religion, or a religion without religion. And by that, he means, I think, that the religious impulse is something that we all have. And religions can sometimes get in the way of that. So a religionless religion is something that he wants us to cultivate. Curious to know what you make of all that. But so our very opening session, when I talked about a lot of things I didn't believe in, but I also said, but I have a very strong positive feeling about religion. You don't have to agree. Religion may not be a useful word for you, but just so you know kind of where I'm coming from. We have also spent quite a bit of time talking about God and how do we language God and what are we talking about when we talk about God. So one thing I want to say again is that the God of supernatural theism, you know, this notion that there's a being out there, this sort of Übermensch, that God is almighty, that God is sovereign, that ultimately God is in control. He knows if you've been bad or good, so be good, for goodness sake. That ultimately God will be in charge of how things turn out, okay? This notion of God as a super being and as sovereign, I think we must get rid of that. I feel really strongly about it. The God of supernatural theism, this notion of a being out there, this Übermensch, never was and isn't. And it's, you know, Jack talks about we cannot help but personify. That's also part of the human, we personify what we love. And Jack says, you know, we can't help but personify God. So the problem isn't that we personify, but I think it's how we do it, or what we personify, okay? And one thing about becoming an adult is that we realize that our personifications are personifications. I think that's part of our coming of age in our faith, okay? Our personifications are personifications. The way that conventional Christianity has tended to personify God has been as a sovereign, almighty God who has a plan for our lives. We may not understand. His ways are not our ways. I think that is dangerous, and I will tell you why. Because I think it incites a kind of divine violence. If our God, for instance, our God, the Christian God, if our God is sovereign And if our God is the way, and God is going to make things right, it's amazing what we will do in the name of God in our faithfulness to that triumphal God. We have spilled so much blood. There have been so many, I mean, what is a holy war? There's no such thing. There's been so much blood spilled in the name of God because of this notion of God's sovereignty, God's triumph, and that we are part of that ultimate triumph. It gives me the chills to think about it. And the more I think about this notion of God as being sovereign and almighty, the less comfortable I am with it, which is, I think, one reason why Jack has encouraged us to use the daring language of the weakness of God. Not that God is weak, but that what the world thinks of as strong, the kind of winner-loser, a kind of triumphalism, a kind of absolutism, that is not, whatever we think God is, that's not the nature and character, to use personifying language, of God. Let me say this, that Jesus's intuition about God was not that at all about being a sovereign judge. Now, some of our New Testament storytelling seems to challenge that. But I claim that Jesus' understanding of God is not a violent, judging God. That's not how, I don't think that's how Jesus thinks. I mean, who am I to say? But I think what he saw and sensed, you can see it in the Beatitudes, you can see it in a whole number of other places. What he saw, that we can do this another way. We can live with one another another way. Another way is possible. And for Jesus, that's how he understood God. Okay. So I just think we have to rethink the sovereignty business. Okay. And sort of play then with, well, what do we mean, the weakness of God? What are we talking about? Is love weak? You know, is forgiveness weak? Is peace weak? Okay. I think also, and I have Jack to thank for this, is that Jack is helping me to think through what is it that what is going on in the name of God? What is going on in the name of God? So when we say something in the name of God, what is really going on? I think that God truly is possibility, hope, faith, love. I think that God is something that is stirring. So I think that the language of God is the language of religion. At least the God language has been given to us. So what are we talking about that insists and evokes and calls our response and pries open the present with possibilities? What are we talking about when we talk about God? What is worthy of the name of God? Okay. Jack, and again, this is sort of playing with language a bit, but Jack has talked about God as event. That there is something that breaks in, breaks open, breaks through our lives. And if I understand Jack correctly, and if I understand Jesus correctly, I think that the premise now, or the invitation to consider what is God, what are we talking about with God, is that God is something unconditional. God is unconditional, okay? God, the unconditional, comes to us without force or pageantry. So the event, if another word for God, comes without force, comes without coercion, comes without a military, comes without pageantry. It's something unconditional that breaks into our lives and opens up our sense of possibility, and that there is always more to come. even if we don't know what it is. Of course, we don't know what it is. God is not transactional. Whatever we are thinking of in the name of God, it is not about transaction. It is not an economy, like you do this for me and you'll get this reward. It is not a strategy. It's not about leverage. Whatever we're saying in the name of God, it's not about a quid pro quo. It's something else. And I'd love to know what your sense of all of this is, okay? That God is something unconditional, that is a deep, deep part of our existence, and that will break in and surprise us at any moment. What is it exactly? I mean, we don't know, but I really want us to move away from a notion of God as sovereign, almighty, transactional. God, Jesus died for our sins, and if we believe in Jesus, then we get to go to heaven, or all that transactional stuff, all that economy language, all of that strategy. I think we need to reimagine God out from under all of that and ponder, what might it mean that God is unconditional, and that and that we respond to that sense of the unconditional stirs us. And I think when we have an experience of the unconditional, and I know that a number of you have had encounters where, it's like being on the corner of 4th and Walnut, which was Merton's experience, but that you maybe see people or see the moment in the day, and you suddenly realize, oh my God, we're really all deeply in this together. Love is the thing. Whatever else is going on, there's something else going on here. And it brings us to tears. It opens our hearts. It's like, oh my God. Okay. I think that's a response to the unconditional. And it stirs us. And it evokes a response in us where we want to be more attuned and alive and participating in that kind of existence. Okay. So again, curious to know what you make of this. Let me say something briefly about language about God and language about our faith. We've talked a little bit about theopoetics. Poetics, the word that poetics comes from is poesis, which means to create. Okay. So language that talks about God, as I said several moments ago, propositional, dogmatic language, even certain language of belief structures, they don't come close to what we experience when we experience God. Okay, it's functional. There are uses for it. Okay, so I'm not saying completely no to doctrine, dogma, blah blah, but I really do think we have to get out from under a lot of that right now. Theopoetic language is language that creates an experience that reflects an experience. At poetry at its best is an experience itself. It creates an experience. It doesn't just talk about it, it creates it. Okay? And so the language of theopoetics, poetics, language that creates, that makes, that suggests, that is dynamic. And then theo, because it's about God. Okay, so language that talks about God, theopoetics. Theopoetic language is, I think, more fitting vocabulary for talking about God and religion than propositional language. Okay. So we've been talking a little bit about theopoetics and the challenge of how we do that, and for instance, how we might do that in the liturgy. We've not talked about that this year, but theopoetics is not the language of argument; it's the language of experience. And so I think this is an important thing to think about. Okay, What kind of language do we use when we talk about God and religion, and what's going on in that language? One more, a quick thing, and then I'm going to turn time over to you. Something else about being Christian or being a religious person in the way that I'm talking about religion. And I really have the conviction that this sense of that there's more to come, that there's sort of a creative, there's always creative possibilities. And by the way, physics is my friend. I think that physics and quantum stuff and a lot of things that we're discovering through the scientific open-ended models is great nurture for our imagination. Okay, I mean, things are more amazing and wondrous and impossible than we might first think. I mean, it can be a particle or a wave, or, you know, there's spooky action at a distance, how things affect things, but it's not causal in the way that we might think causal, but it's so interrelated and dynamic. And this is fun. It's interesting. It's a great time to be alive and fuss with all this and wonder about all this, especially as we think about what is going on in the name of God. Okay. I think hope, which for me in part is the future will always be better. The future will always be better. We don't hear that very often. The evidence is maybe 50-50, I'll grant that. But deep in us, I think we have a sense that the future will be better because we will make it so. Okay. And that we ultimately have faith that others will help to make it so. We're all in this together. We don't want to let each other down. Hope is a possibility, is the sense of possibility for a better future. It's the sense that the impossible can become possible. And I'll say more about that at the very end. Hope insists on more life. And I think that's built into us. So I'm curious to know what you think. I'm going to read a poem to kind of close my part of this today that I think captures what I'm trying to talk about, or what I am talking about. Yeah, I'm trying to talk. I think this poem describes event. And by the way, the poet calls it grace. So does Jack. God, event, grace, the unconditional. Okay. I think she describes event. I think that she acknowledges that the dailiness of our life is broken into by something that we can't completely comprehend and certainly can't capture, but we know it, we feel it, we respond to it. She calls life a simple bread that's worth the eating. I love that. It's like life is worth living. So my friends, cherish it. Okay. And then she talks about this other thing that sort of a sense of wonder. She describes it as a drunkenness and likens it to wine. Okay. I love the Eucharistic suggestions of this, the bread and wine suggestion. I love how she does this. But she says something else breaks in that we didn't make it happen. It's not that we earned it or whatever, but that it's beyond our, it's in another dimension. Okay. And it seems to come from some dark star, you know. And she ends the poem by saying, and I've also seen this in a human face. This is like Eliot saying, the gift half guessed is incarnation. Okay. So I'm going to read this to you, and it's a little bit difficult, but for me, it captures something. So here we go, okay? Grace by Judith Wright. Living is dailiness, a simple bread that's worth the eating. But I have known a wine, a drunkenness that can't be spoken or sung without betraying it. Far past yours or mine, and even past ours, it has nothing at all to say, but it slants a sudden laser through the common day. It seems to have nothing to do with things at all, requires another element or dimension. Not contemplation brings it, it merely happens. Past expectation and beyond intention. It takes over the depth of flesh. The inward eye is there, then vanishes, does not live or die, because it occurs beyond the here and now, positives, negatives, what we hope for and are. I mean, not even being in love or making love brings it, but it plunges a sword from a dark star. Maybe there was once a word for it. Call it grace. I've seen it. And once or twice through a human face. I'm going to read it one more time. Living is dailiness, a simple bread that's worth the eating. But I have known a wine, a drunkenness that can't be spoken or sung without betraying it. Far past yours or mine, even past ours, it has nothing at all to say, but it slants a sudden laser through common day. It seems to have nothing to do with things at all, requires another element or dimension. Not contemplation brings it, it merely happens. Past expectation and beyond intention. It takes over the depth of flesh, the inward eye, is there, then vanishes, doesn't live or die, because it occurs beyond the here and now, positives, negatives, beyond what we hope and are. Not even being in love or making love brings it. It plunges a sword from a dark star. Maybe there was once a word for it. Call it grace. I've seen it once or twice through a human face. So now I want us to move into a plenary time. I would love to hear from you, sort of what has stirred you in our conversations this year. Is something loosening or freeing up? I mean, is that comfortable, uncomfortable? How are you responding to the conversation? What do you make of Christianity in and for the 21st century? Christianity in the 21st century is in trouble. I mean, it's the brand might be wrecked. I grab that, but I'm not finished talking about it yet, and I have great hope for Christianity for the 21st century. But I'd love to know what you think. By the way, you will be receiving a questionnaire. We're going to mail it out to you on Monday that will ask you for some feedback about this year. Okay, so that is forthcoming. But for today, I really want to know what's going on for you. What have you been experiencing? What are you wondering about? What are your thoughts? Okay. So in preparation for that, I do want to read the Discerning Hearts Ministries guidelines, the listening guidelines. I think these are really, really helpful. And these are courtesies, and they're on our website, but you can also get them on the Listening Hearts Ministries website. So here they are. And do the best we can to be mindful of these guidelines in our conversations. So, first of all, take time to become settled in God's presence. Listen to others with your entire self, senses, feelings, intuition, imagination, and rational faculties. Do not interrupt. Pause between speakers to absorb what has been said. Do not formulate what you want to say while someone else is speaking. Speak for yourself only. Express your own thoughts and feelings, referring to your own experiences. And avoid being hypothetical. Steer away from broad generalizations, which is sort of what I've been doing all morning. Do not challenge what others say. Listen to the group as a whole, to those who have not spoken aloud, as well as to those who have. And generally leave space for anyone who may want to speak a first time before speaking a second time yourself. And hold your desires and opinions, even your convictions, lightly. I think these are really, really hard to hold, but I think they're great guidelines. So what I'd like to do is just give us a minute of silence to see what's coming up for you. I'd love to hear your thoughts, and we will be taking the next almost half an hour. We'll see how the conversation goes, but almost the next half an hour to do this. And my beloved friend, Jeff Creswell, will help to facilitate this. But let's just be in the silence for a moment, see what comes up, and then we'll start our plenary. Hello, my friend Jeff.
Hi, Marianne.
Hi. Do you want to say, or you or Megan want to say anything before we open this up for folks?
I would just say that I have been following along in the chat. There's been lots and lots of ponderings in the chat, and I will do my best to call on a wide variety of people. We may not get to everybody's comment, but I think there's going to be plenty for us to chew on and ponder in the next half an hour.
And let me just say, I don't read the chat, so I have no idea what's going on in the chat. So I think that I'll be able to see them later. But thank you, Jeff, for listening to the group the way that you are. So I appreciate that.
Good. So Barbara G had a comment or a question for you about the difference between your view of Jesus as a young child versus your view of Jesus as a young adult. Barbara, are you available to?
I don't need to say anything. I just would love to hear her answer to the question.
Okay. Interestingly enough, in many ways, I continue to experience Jesus the way I did as a child. I know. that there is something about presence, and that I continue to have a sense of, yeah, maybe presence is the best way to put it. And I think that the language I would use now is, I think that as a child, I was able to access something unconditional. Okay. And all due respect to my parents, there are a lot of great things about them, but I did not grow up with any sense of what the unconditional is. I mean, what's unconditional love? You know, I remember my brother and I talking about this once. It's like, unconditional love, don't know what it is, you know. But I think that there was something in me that, even so, had a sense of the unconditional. And as a child, for however this happened, and by the way, I had religious people in my family history, and so who knows what gets carried down in the genes. You know, maybe I inherited some sensibility about this, who knows. But I think that Jesus was an unconditional presence for me as a child. And indeed, I did think of him as my guardian angel. In some ways, I still do, but I imagine it differently now. But experientially, I still have this sense of a presence of something unconditional. And for me, Jesus continues to embody that. Okay. And that's one reason that I'm Christian and not a Buddhist or a Sufi, which I really would have loved to have been. But there's something about Jesus that continues to borrow a word of Jack's, haunt me. Okay. It's real, but I don't want to absolutize it at the same time. Okay. So as I said in my description, same Jesus, only entirely different. Does that make any sense to you?
Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you, Barbara. Liliana had a comment about the fact that we all have a religious impulse. Liliana, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Hello, Lily. I know Lily.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Do you want to put yourself on video or not?
Yeah.
Hi, Lily. Lily.
I am.
Lily, Marcus and I knew
Hi.
Lily and her Wolfgang, who died several years ago. But Marcus and Lily and Wolfgang and I have been friends. So hello, Lily. Nice to see you.
Yes. We are homo religiosus, you know.
I think
we
so.
are born with the feeling, of the ineffable.
That's my premise.
It's something more.
That's my premise.
Yes, it is. And even the most fierce atheists have the same sense, except they use a different language, and I think they resist it, and it's there in a different form. I don't believe there are atheists, by the way.
Well,
okay, I don't know what else to say, but I agree.
It's great to see you. Let me say something about atheists, though. Away from theism.
Okay.
Okay. So those people who say, well,
yes, away from theism.
They're maybe moving. They're saying, you know what? It's Marcus's brilliant thing. You know, tell me about the God you don't believe in. It's like, I don't believe in God. I'm an atheist. Well, tell me about the God you don't believe in. So for me, atheist is not necessarily a negative. It's like moving away from this theistic notion of God. And I say that's not the end of belief. It's the beginning. Okay. So, I mean, I'm putting a nice gloss on atheism, but that atheism is like the beginning of reimagining. So here. Okay. But I'm with you that I think that we are homo religioso also. I think that we are, that's built into us, that is deep in
It
our.
is built.
So I'm glad. I'm glad.
And it is deeply, and I want to say that it is deeply in us. It's not only external. It's not, and people are beginning to understand that all that is this hints and questions is deeply inside of us, and we have that immense power in a maybe in a small but maybe in a large quantity, and I'm happy that people feel the God inside as well as everything surrounding us. It's religion used to be something exterior, and
Right,
I
that's
think we
that's
are beginning
religion
to
in
become
place.
interior.
Right, right. I agree. And it is something deep within us.
Thank you for
Thanks, Lily. Thank you so much.
deep.
One reason that I'm interested in these,
Thank you.
yes, yes.
Mm.
One reason I'm interested in these conversations is that I'm with Lily on this, that there is something deep in us that, for lack of a better word, is a kind of goodness and a kind of future looking and a kind of creativity and imagination that seeks more life, okay? If we don't get this, I mean, it's in us, but if we don't get free from some of the shackles, cultural or otherwise, fear-based or otherwise, that makes us doubt all of this kind of stuff, I don't think we're going to make it. Okay. And I'm not a hair on fire person,
No.
anybody who knows me. But I don't know if I'm talking 50 years, 500 years, 10,000 years, but as a species, I don't think we're going to make it unless we have a deeper sense of the unconditional and come to love, to just cherish our life, live life. Let the
Yes,
blossom
and
as we
feel
blossom.
that love.
Not for why, not as a strategy, but cherish life and long that others will have the same experience. I think the heart of Christianity affirms that. And that's one reason that I'm continuing to talk about Christianity as a continuing wisdom tradition, even for the 21st century. Anyway, thank you, Lily.
Good, and thank you. Today was brilliant.
Thank you.
I absorbed every word that you said.
Thank you. Lily. Moving right along.
Bye.
Thank you, Lily. Robert Maloon had an interesting quote from Marcus that he shared.
Oh, I'd love it.
Robert. We may have lost. Oh, there he is.
Oh, good. Wonderful. Oh, turn on your mic.
Thank you.
There you go.
Yeah, the quote comes from Marcus's book on Conversations with Scripture, Mark. And in the introduction, he says that basically we had a youthful idea of God, and it's time to shed that and to come to grips with an adult understanding. And that has really, unlike you, Marianne, I consider myself a Christian docent. I teach adult education at our church, a very small church, but and I try to challenge people to rethink what things are and how they affect us in the 21st century. Our motto of our church is open minds, open arms. And we practice that with great deal of vigor.
Great.
Anyway, I thank you for your monthly conversations, and I continually thank God for Marcus.
So do I. So do I. Now, Mark, the work that is Marcus Borg,
I must say,
in the flesh and in his mind, is worthy of the name of God.
Marcus taught me the conversation of faith.
If I may, thanks be to God. And yes, Marcus was a great voice, and lover of Christianity and
Mm.
lover of God,
Mm.
like the prophets.
Yes, he was a prophet.
Mm.
Thank you, Robert, so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Eileen E. had a comment that she would like to share with you,
Hi
Marianne.
there. Can you see me all right? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, great.
There you
Thank
are.
you. I'm a Presbyterian minister and have been for over 30 years. And my friend Alexis told me about this program, and she's here. And then I told my friend Jennifer about it, and she's now here.
Well, carry on the conversation as you do.
And we're going to have a little Zoom conversation after this. And the
Good.
three of us are going to discuss this.
Great.
So what I wanted to say was that I so appreciate these second Saturdays and your carrying your love for Marcus as a person and as a theologian and sharing so much with everybody. I appreciate it deeply. When I was a child, a teenager, I was introduced to the idea of God that I since found out was Anselm's ontological argument.
Right.
That than which nothing greater can be conceived. And what that did for me, well before I considered ministry, was that I could make God up. I could imagine the best that was possible, and offer myself to that, bow down to that, the best, the most beautiful, the most gorgeous sunset, the kindest, and just keep expanding out without any end.
Mm-hmm.
And that stood me in good stead as I was given the patriarchal transactional. Thank you for that word. I know Marcus used it, but I just got it when finally in listening to you, transactional. Even though that's certainly what I was given in seminary and the whole bit, I have never lost that essential sense that God is how I imagine the most glorious. It's a lot of freedom for me in that.
Yeah.
The other thing I wanted to say is that this whole idea of Jesus dying for my sins,
Mm-hmm.
how I've come to understand that, Marianne, is that he died for in the sense of because of or on account of. Gandhi died for my sins, and many people have died for the dark side of human beings. So I understand that dying for my sins in that grammatical sense, because of. Because I still pay for my own sins, thank you. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's a freeing understanding for me of that
Right.
idea, which has never made sense to me, just as it hasn't to you.
Yeah.
So just thank you so much. I didn't know we'd stop for the summer, but
Yes,
yeah,
we'll take a little break for July and August, and then we'll come back together again in September for sure.
yeah, thank you so much, Marianne.
Yeah,
And everybody.
yeah, indeed.
Great. Thank you, Eileen. Chris Armstrong Stevenson
Yes.
had a comment about what is prayer if there's a non-transactional God?
Mm-hmm.
Chris, are you there? We may have lost Chris.
Okay.
I don't know, but I think that question is a good question.
I do too. I think the whole issue of prayer is really important. And by the way, we'll spend a session on that next year, or next season. Whatever our I don't know how here language fails me, but I don't think prayer is at the heart of prayer. I don't think is petitionary, even though we do it all the time. I do it. I still storm heaven, I come up with a good bargain. I mean, so I still do that. All right. But I think the heart of prayer is something else. And it may, I don't know, we'll explore this next year, but it may have something to do with just sitting in that stirring of the unconditional. And the thing about the unconditional is it doesn't guarantee anything. I mean, that's kind of a hard thing to say, isn't it? But I don't think it guarantees, but it opens up, it continues to open. I mean, for instance, the morning Mark died, okay, and I shared this year, but the morning Mark died, it was stunning, right? And something else happened at the same time that morning that really addressed me. It was the tulips, it was the patchwork quilt, it was the patch of a rainbow in the sky, it was the woman coming who was pregnant, who knew Mark, who had been a student of his. So where the only thing I felt that could, the day couldn't hold anything more, and Marcus just died. I mean, how can anything else happen? I mean, how could the world go on? I mean, that's what happened that day. And something else also happened that helped me realize there's something else can come. It didn't negate Marcus's death. It wasn't a salve really, but it was just so interesting that those things happened together. So I'm using that as an example of Marcus's death, and then that, and even experiencing Marcus's death was in many ways an unconditional moment, a moment of unconditional realization. I remember when he was dying and looking at him, and I had this sense that, oh my gosh, I'm looking at God. I mean, he would love to hear me say that. But what I mean is that his life, his dying, his coming death, it's all of a piece. I mean, I can't articulate that, but so prayer, I don't know, but, and we will do what we do, confessional prayer, intercessory prayer. Actually, I believe in intercessory prayer. Okay. Petitionary, all this. But just like with God, I think we have to seek out different language for what is going on in the name of prayer. So anyway, Chris, thank you for the question, and we will explore that. We will do some exploring next year. So
that's great.
Yeah, thank you.
Lal Chandranath has a hand up on the screen. Lal.
Oh, I see him.
I think you should be able to see me now.
Yes, there you are. Good.
Yeah, I'm all the way from Sri Lanka.
Oh, my dear.
So it's almost getting close to midnight here.
Huh.
And I don't have good lighting in my room. So please excuse that. I've read quite a bit of Marcus's books and have been influenced thoroughly by him. I followed your Saturday, second Saturday programs for a while now, because I've been sort of trying to work out, since I retired, I had more time now to work this idea out. Who is God? Who is Jesus? What is all of these stuff like? And I could say I'm confused. And I think some of your programs have helped me put things in some perspective, not fully, but I appreciate all the effort. So thank you for that. But let me ask one question, because we in Sri Lanka, we live in a very almost a multi-religious, very strongly multi-religious environment. And I see the Muslim community in some way very, very adhered together, and they move together in almost mobs like. And I find that some of that religious feelings are close to this theopoetics like, because they recite very loudly, and there is some way that I think that helps them to understand God like, or that sensibility I had like. Would you have a comment on that, or?
I think some recitation
Yes.
can be theopoetic, but I wouldn't put recitation necessarily in the same category.
Okay.
Do you see this, because you're say a little bit more about what you think you're observing. I mean, do you think this is a positive thing, or do you think that
I think
you actually
it's
use the
very-
word mob, I think, and so I was a little concerned with what you were perceiving.
Yeah, what I mean by mob is maybe a community, maybe I used the wrong word.
No, that's okay, good.
Yeah. Now, we are having great difficulty getting people to church, to get them together and all kinds of things.
Right.
I do not see it with Muslims like. Whether it's a compulsion, I do not know.
Okay.
But I could see every Friday or every prayer time they would annoy sometimes some communities, and that has been now legislated out, but they would put a loudspeaker and they would chant.
Yeah. Okay.
And that sort of seems to resonate with that community, like,
Right. I think that kind of sort of familiarity, that kind of repetition. I mean, we have it in the Christian community as well.
Yes,
the Lord's Prayer, or certain chants, or for those of us in liturgical, it's just that we sort of get into, even with the liturgy. For myself, I'm an Episcopalian, I kind of get into a kind of the zone. If I don't let the language get in the way of the zone too much, which sometimes it does. But I think that is, it's part of ritual. It's part of a sense of familiarity. There is an aesthetic to it. There's a rhythm to it. All of that, I think, is contributes to a sense of community and community worship. So I see those things as neither good nor bad, depending upon the content.
Okay.
So if coming to prayer and being involved in the prayers and hearing I was born in Saudi Arabia. So my first call to prayer was in Arabic.
Yes.
I heard the call to prayer before I really knew what it was in Arabic. When I have traveled in the Middle East and I hear the call to prayer, something tunes into me, because it's a sound that goes way, way back and in my own personal history, but it's an ancient, ancient sound. So all of this stuff is very evocative and it's very powerful. And I think it's important. I think ritual and all that stuff is important. I also think that what it evokes in us, if it evokes more compassion, more love for life, that's great. If there's a violent undertone, like there is in Christianity so often. I mean, look what's happening in Christianity in America. Look what's been done in the name of God in America, in Christianity. I mean, so I think that the content of these things is also important. So, but I can appreciate that there's something about what they're doing in worship that continues to draw people. And it's much harder for you right now to get people to come to church.
Yes.
That's worth us continuing to talk about. And so what do we have to do to make it more inviting? And it could be that a lot of people in Christianity are rethinking all of this. And while we are, a lot of people are sort of pausing in terms of how they want to worship. that may not be happening in the communities you're observing. They're still very much engaged. And you know, Islam is, the heart of Islam is peace too. Like the heart of Christianity, I think, is about peace and love. I think the heart of Islam is that too. So getting to the heart of the matter.
Thank you very much.
Anyway, I talked too much about that, but thank you. And thank you so much for burning the midnight oil and being part of this conversation, and knowing that, you know, and that you're carrying on conversations like this where you are. I think that's great. Yeah.
Thank you.
Upon you. Peace.
Thank you, Lau. I think sort of continuing in this interesting conversation, Marianne, you mentioned the Episcopal liturgy, and Joan P. had a wondering about what a liturgy would look like if it were a liturgy addressed to a non-sovereign God. Joan, did you want to come on?
Sure. I'm in Reno, Nevada, and an Episcopalian. And liturgy in my early life was very nurturing, and I loved liturgy.
I do too.
Somewhere along the line, it went awry. And I think it's the language. And I think the God language is hidden in the empire language, what I see as language of empire. And so I struggle, because now liturgy that meant so much, I just am pushing back all the time. So you just mentioned about taking a pause, and pandemic has certainly brought that about for me, to take a pause. But by saying that, I hunger for a liturgy that is open, and all that you have brought forth in these conversations, to see this non-sovereign God, but a God of weakness. Well, in our world, weakness is not something that's lifted up. And so that's my conundrum. And I've so appreciated the conversations, because it's kind of affirming that what I feel deep inside has some validity, and that's been helpful. So thank you for that.
You're welcome. Yeah, I think that the church converted to Constantinianism rather than Constantine really being converted to Christianity. Okay. So, and I think that we do see that kind of language, that more imperial, you know, Diocletian diocese, it's, you know, it's Roman, it's imperial, you know. So I agree. Is there another way to go about this? And I think there is. And rather than addressing God as, oh, God Almighty, or, you know, Father, or whatever, is, you know, as I said earlier, what's going on in the name of God? What is this about? So I very much appreciate you. I too, I've loved the liturgy. That's one reason I became an Episcopalian from being Presbyterian. But it was more liturgically rich, and at least my experience of it was. But now what? So I'm pondering that myself. But yes, you're not alone in this, you know. And liturgy is important.
And there's comfort in that, to know that I'm not alone in it.
No, yes, you're not alone in that. And how do we share a voice?
Yes.
How do we sing our song in a strange land? How do we sing our strange song in this land? You know, so that's definitely something we're thinking about, wondering about, and maybe working on. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're not alone.
Thank you. Patty Craig had a comment about prayer following the discussion about prayer. Patty, are you there?
I'm here.
Yeah.
Do I need to press something?
Yeah, can you share? There you go.
Okay, there I am. Yes, I enjoy prayer very much.
Good. That's a great statement.
Really.
Here's a bumper sticker for you.
I also believe in part of the Anglican liturgy. I'm from Canada. Glory to God, whose power working in us can do infinitely more than we can ask or imagine. So I don't petition God. I love to empty myself out, to get rid of everything that's weighing me down today. And I love to welcome God into my life. And often that does, though, get into prayer for people who are suffering, who who I care about.
Sure.
But I try to stay open to God if I can. And I love the quote that somebody put down: God, whose love and joy are present everywhere, can't come to visit you unless you aren't there. I just thought that was fantastic. Get rid of yourself and make room for God. So anyway, and this is my first visit to you, Marianne. I read Marx's books. I've been searching for a lot of reasons, but I want to thank you so much, and I hope to be able to attend in the fall when you start your next session.
Lovely.
Very much at home here.
Oh, lovely. Well, and everyone will get an invitation for the next session, so that'll be forthcoming. Yeah, and I love what you're saying about, prayer as it's a way we love one another.
Mhm.
So, I mean, I'm all for that. Okay. And when I say not petitionary, don't misunderstand. I mean, we know that, things don't always turn out the way we want. Things aren't, so if you pray for someone's healing, that's great. Pray for that. But, if they die, don't think your prayer hasn't been answered. I mean, I think that those kind of formulas are not helpful, in my opinion.
Mhm.
So, but I think you're spot on about prayer is part of how we love. And I do think, and this is going to sound a little woo-woo, but molecularly, I think it makes a difference.
Mhm.
I really do.
Mhm.
Spooky action at a distance. I think that there is such a thing. So I'm big on the power of love.
Mhm.
And this is a very provocative thing to say. This will be the first time you've heard it. We talked about it a little bit last time, but the possibility that God is also mortal. I know. Okay.
Mhm.
But that doesn't mean that love endeth.
Mhm.
Anyway, that's
Thank you so
a little
much.
provocative. Okay, thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Welcome. I hope to see you next fall.
Oh, you will.
Yeah. Good.
Marianne, I think we are at time.
I think so too. And I want to close with, actually, Jeff, I think you wanted to say something before.
I did have one quick thing that I wanted to say before we turn it over to you for our final closure, and then a little break before the coffee break.
Correct.
And that is that I've heard many of you who are on this call express your appreciation for this work.
Oh.
And as someone behind the scenes, I would like to just make explicit the fact that what you're looking at is the tip of an iceberg, and that the iceberg below is the support team that works with Marianne, including Megan and her webmaster, and Lisa, and the fact that it does cost money to put on these Second Saturday conversations. And they've been offered freely and generously for a reason, to invite anyone and everyone to come and to not think twice about it.
Right.
But if you have the resources and the ability to support this work, I would encourage you to make a donation to the Marcus Borg Foundation, because the Marcus Borg Foundation exists to continue these conversations which began with Marianne and Marcus and are continuing on with Marianne and Marcus. Right. So I just really would invite you to think about contributing to this work. If it is something that you value, if you plan to join us in the fall, consider making a donation to the foundation so that we can continue this work.
Jeff.
Upset.
Jeff, thank you. And we are a nonprofit, so these are tax deductible contributions. But
Absolutely.
Jeff, thank you. Thank you for that. Well, let me, and thank you to everybody who shared. I look forward to seeing the chat myself, okay? Megan will send that to me in a bit. So thank you. Let me just affirm that, I think all of us, we're people who've been stirred and called. There's some summons, as there is a claim on us in a way that won't let us go. And we're not letting it go. I think all of that is lovely. It's good. And that we see with the heart and we weep with our eyes, and we dare to imagine, like Jesus, that there is another way. There's another way to do this. He called it the kingdom of God. To close, I'm going to read from the prophet Isaiah from chapter 40. And our closing slides, that's the music that'll be playing underneath our closing slides, is from the prophet Isaiah. You'll get it in just a second. But I want to, one reason I'm choosing this quote from Isaiah is because theology, and I borrowed this from Jack, is it's radical thinking of the possibility of the impossible. Okay? Christian theology is an intuition that things can be different. As I said a minute ago, that there's another way to go about this. And what I'm going to read from Isaiah suggests that the world can be turned upside down, inside out. It can be inverted. Okay. I mean, violence can give way to peace. Mercilessness can give way to mercy. Hostility can give way to hospitality. The last will be first. The first will be last. The poor will be free. Justice will come. Okay. And all of those things, I think, are worthy of what is going on in the name of God. Okay. So Jack talks a lot about the impossible, but I think what the impossible is the sense that things can be different. This is the passion of the prophets. Okay. That there's a way that the impossible can become possible. And I'm going to read you from Isaiah 40. Please do not literalize this, because if you literalize this prophetic passion, all the possibility goes out of it. And I would say that about a lot of gospel stories too. If you literalize them, all the possibility goes out of them. Okay. So what I'm going to read is Theopoetic Language that talks about the impossible becoming possible, and that the world can be changed. So here's to a passion for the impossible, the prophetic passion. Comfort, oh, comfort my people. In the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord, make straight in the desert a highway for our God. Every valley shall be lifted up, every mountain and hill be made low. The uneven ground shall become level, and the rough places a plain. Then the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all people shall see it together, for the mouth of the Lord has spoken it. Theology is radical thinking of the possibility of the impossible. And in that, we have great hope and promise. And that kind of hope and promise and cherishing of life now and life to come is worthy of what's going on in the name of God. So thank you so much for being with us this year and being part of this conversation, and also carrying on these conversations in your own communities. I think that's really important. So here's to the prophetic passion, which is ours.